I want to switch gears, Alex, to another story that you're highlighting in the newsletter. It's an important one, and it doesn't get a lot of press coverage, but it's about the recent anti-government protests in Sudan. Thousands of people across that country have faced tear gas, they faced violence. Explain to our audience exactly what they're protesting and why are things escalating.
So the protests in Sudan began several weeks ago, and initially they were in response to economic issues, high prices in particular for bread, medicines, other staple items. The government responded with extreme brutality. Tear gas was only the half of it. Several dozen people have been killed. And now the protests have taken on a much broader sense of frustration with the government of President Omar Bashir, who has been in power for 30 years, one of the most odious autocrats really in the world. Frustration with the economic mismanagement, frustration with the corruption, and frustration with the political repression. And people have been in the streets for weeks now.
He's been in power for 30 years.
Yep.
I feel like every time I hear about Sudan, it's about suffering.
Yep.
Clearly, people, even with the brutality they're facing, are taking to the streets. How has he managed to maintain power this long?
Three ways. One is through incredibly ruthless repression. The second is through stoking and amplifying divisions within the country. When he first came to power, he ramped up the government's campaign against separatists in South Sudan. That was a war that ultimately left 2 million people dead, led to the secession of South Sudan. You and your viewers will probably remember the Darfur crisis. He carried out a genocide against rebels in western Sudan in Darfur. So repression, domestic tensions, and also a very pragmatic relationship with outside powers. What many people don't know is that the U.S. sanctions that were imposed on Sudan in 1997 were lifted a year and a half ago as the Trump administration was trying to get Sudan on board, in particular for its campaign of pressure against North Korea. Right? One of the things that the Sudanese government was able to do for a long time was to blame economic suffering on those U.S. sanctions. The sanctions were lifted in 2017. They have not led to an economic revival. Many businesses aren't even, they're still wouldn't touch Sudan with a tent pole. But what they have done is they've removed the ability of the government to say, hey, our suffering is due to neo-colonial pressure from the West. In fact, it's much more open now, and people are saying, hey, this government is really screwed up. This government spends all its money on military, almost nothing on health, infrastructure, education, and people are fed up with it.
It's a terrible story, and as you point out, Anne-Marie, it's a country that has faced so much extreme violence, poverty, tragedy over the past 30 years plus, and it's all really due to this one individual. Odious is a kind word, I'd say, for him, Alex.